Good morning or good afternoon, whatever time you may be tuning in today, and welcome to episode 5 of the Beware the Day podcast. My name is Ryan. I am your host. I want to thank you for tuning in today. As I always say, there's over 5 million podcasts in the podcast universe with over 70 million subscribers. I'm glad you chose this podcast today. Today, we're going to be talking about the Great Depression and the New Deal. I just want to once again acknowledge Black El Paso Voice for giving me this platform to speak truth to power as it relates to Black history and Black culture. I want you to subscribe and follow me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Apple, iHeart, and Spotify. And as always, we're going to keep the theme of generational wealth permanently. I made a command decision. I made an executive decision. We're going to be talking about generational wealth every time I'm on the air, every time I do this podcast. So if you want more information about an incredible opportunity, you can go to my website, KRC Companies LLC. It's my Facebook page. That's KRC Companies LLC, where you will find ways to assist business owners in boosting their profitability and cash flow. You'll find information on affordable healthcare solutions. And as always, we will continue to promote generational wealth. That's KRC Companies LLC. That is my Facebook page. Now, before we dive into today's topic, which is the Great Depression and the New Deal, we are in Black History Month. Some of you may be uncomfortable with what I'm about to say, but I believe that Black History Month isn't for Black people, it's for everyone else. My Black History Month runs from January 1st through December 31st. So, and now that we're in Black History Month, let's talk about someone that is near and dear to my heart. As you may or may not know, the theme for this year is Black Americans and the Arts. So we're going to talk about Langston Hughes briefly. Langston Hughes, of course, his poem Warning is where the name of this podcast originates. So let's talk about Langston Hughes. He was born on February 1st, 1901 in Joplin, Missouri. So yesterday would have been his, well, you do the math. What is that, 122 years? Is that right? 123 years. Well, he was born on February 1st, 1901 in Joplin, Missouri. He was a leader of the Harlem Renaissance. Mr. Hughes attended Central High School in Cleveland, Ohio, and Lincoln University, which is an HBCU in Chester County, Pennsylvania. Now, prior to attending Lincoln, and I found this to be very interesting, he was a personal assistant to Carter G. Woodson, who is the founder of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History in Washington, D.C. Langston Hughes began writing at a very early age. His works were later published in The Crisis, which is the official journal of the NAACP, and the Chicago Defender. He published a collection of short stories called The Ways of White Folks while spending a year in Carmel by the Sea, California. He's authored novels, short stories, plays, poetry, operas, essays, and works for children. His best-known works include the poems Mother to Son, Warning, and Let America Be America Again. So I encourage you all to go to the internet and Google Langston Hughes and read some of his works and get to know Langston Hughes, the poet, the author, and just simply get to know him and learn more about his life and his work and his contributions to our culture. So let's just move quickly into our topic for today. Just to recap quickly, last week we talked about the Great Migration and Black capitalism. Of course, the Great Migration came about because of the conditions in the South. In the early 20th century, there was a great migration of African Americans from the South to the North, and of course, which led to what we call the golden age of Black capitalism. And if you want more information, just tune into last week's podcast. And so today, we're going to talk about the Great Depression and the New Deal. As always, I want to give credit to the reference material that I'm using. The book is called The Color of Wealth, and we are in chapter number 3. Now, of course, when the Great Depression hit with the crashing of the stock market in 1929, African Americans were probably hit the hardest. Many black-owned businesses failed during the Great Depression. If you recall, there were more than 50 black-owned banks prior to the Depression, and that number dwindled down to 12. Contrary to popular belief, many African Americans were not served by the social welfare programs created by the New Deal. Domestic and agricultural workers were excluded. 60% of African American jobs during the Great Depression were either in the domestic or agricultural sector in the 1930s. And then 42% of the remaining African Americans did not earn enough to qualify for benefits. Now, the way it was structured, the federal government would mandate these programs, but they were administered at the state level and at the county level. And what that meant for blacks in the South, they decided how those benefits were going to be administered and in what amount those benefits were going to be distributed. So Southern legislators were determined to keep African Americans needy and desperate. So keep in mind that their economy was primarily agricultural. So this was their way of keeping African Americans on the farms, picking their cotton and sugar and other crops. So Southern legislators were determined to keep African Americans needy and desperate. Unemployment insurance and the federal minimum wage did not apply to domestic or agricultural workers. African Americans who qualified for Social Security were paid less in the South. 10 states in the South paid African Americans less than $10 per month. Now, as I stated earlier, while relief programs were 70% funded by the federal government, the local authorities had the power to set benefit limits and eligibility rules. So the Great Depression, of course, gave birth to the Social Security Act. Other programs came into place, like the Aid to Families with Dependent Children. At the time, it was called the Aid to Dependent Children. This program was born in 1936. However, this program excluded children from poor two-parent households for fear that able-bodied black workers would stop working. Now, what the people in the South didn't understand, that it wasn't just black Americans, but it was also poor European Americans. So here we have another example of people saying no to a benefit because, well, if those black folks are getting it, then we're not gonna participate. So they're hurting, once again, they're hurting their own people, in other words. States, of course, set their own benefit levels. Texas, Kentucky, and Mississippi had no aid to dependent children program whatsoever. So they basically said, we're not going to participate. In 1940, 2/3 of eligible children were not receiving benefits. Now, in 1939, survivor benefits were added to the Social Security program, and most of the recipients were European American widows. In addition to Social Security and aid to dependent children, farm aid went to European American farmers disproportionately. Many used the benefits to purchase tractors and evict sharecroppers. The number of black-owned farms dropped dramatically between 1930 and 1939. The National Recovery Administration set wages at $12 per week for the cotton industry, but many black workers had jobs that were not covered by the law. Employers reduced black wages to pay European Americans more. During this time, the federal government gave support to labor unions through the passage of the National Labor Relations Act. So once this act was passed, black workers were excluded from labor unions. Now, There were places of employment where there was a mixture of both union and non-union workers. These were known as open shops, and those open shops were banned by the National Labor Relations Act. The American Federation of Labor fought to keep black workers excluded from labor unions. The public works programs and the New Deal gave some opportunities and some anti-discrimination protection to black workers. So let's shift gears and talk about homeowners. Now, the Homeowners Loan Corporation was created to help homeowners to avoid foreclosure. However, not one single loan out of more than 1 million loans went to a black homeowner. And it gets worse. The Federal Housing Administration only issued loans that were economically sound, which led to the practice of redlining. So the practice of redlining was originated by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Neighborhoods were color-coded on maps and given grades of A through D, A meaning most desirable and D meaning less desirable. So you can imagine where those neighborhoods were that got a rating of D or a grade of D. Redlining, black and mixed race neighborhoods were redlined. Realtors, restrictive covenants, and neighbors kept black families out of European American neighborhoods. Now, let's talk about restrictive covenants. Restrictive covenants were put in mortgage documents and sales documents, which basically said that you will not sell this home to anyone other than a member of the white race. So restrictive covenants were placed in sales contracts, and of course, realtors who conspired with bankers and mortgage lenders kept black families out of European American neighborhoods. Public housing was segregated and tenants were selected by race. Many towns in the North prohibited blacks from living within the city limits, and some towns even prohibited black people from being in the city limits after sundown. I'm sure some of you have heard of sundown towns. Well, those sundown towns still exist today. So you can go to Google and just Google sundown towns and look into that for yourself. And we may do a segment on sundown towns in a future podcast. A 1943 study revealed that the annual income of a black family in the rural South was $565, while the average annual income of a European American family in the rural South was 3 times that amount, or $1,695. The average annual income for a black family in the urban areas of the South was a little higher, $635 a year, while the average income for an urban European American family was $2,019 even. So, to wrap up, when the stock market crashed in 1929, which ushered in the Great Depression, the federal government, through the New Deal, provided several federal programs to assist Americans. Unfortunately, African Americans were either excluded or their participation was such that it did make a dent in their overall financial condition. So that's the Great Depression and the New Deal. Now, next week, we're going to talk about African Americans in the post-World War II GI Bill. There was a lot of talk about the GI Bill, how people were able to go to school, how they got mortgages and other benefits through the post-World War II GI Bill. However, once again, African American veterans were excluded in large numbers. And we're going to do a deep dive into the GI Bill on the next podcast. Well, we've come to the end of another podcast. I want to thank Black El Paso Voice. Make sure you tune in to other podcasts on this platform, Suite 915 with Curtis and Fedora, and Real Talk with Marcus McCoy. I'm going to ask that you support this podcast through either my Cash App or through my Zelle. And I want to thank you once again for tuning in to episode 5 of Beware the Day. This is Ryan. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend. Take care, and we will see you next time.